Can you explain to Americans what exactly will they face if this happens?
Sure. As the president talked about in his speech, we are aware that, again, when America stands for her principles and all of the things that we hold dear, it requires sometimes for us to put ourselves out there in a way that maybe we will incur some cost. And in this situation, that may relate to energy costs, for example. But we are taking very specific and appropriate, I believe, steps to mitigate what that cost might be if it happens.
The previous one, why do you think he didn't act then?
I hope you get a chance to ask him.
And do you have any indication about whether President Putin has made a decision on whether to invade? Do you feel confident that he hasn't made that decision already?
As of this moment, I'm convinced he's made the decision. We have reason to believe that.
We are being told that you have several days and then the war will start. And I said, okay, then apply the sanctions today. Yes, they say, we apply sanctions when the war will happen. I'm saying, fine, but you are telling me that it's 100% that the war will start in a couple of days. Then what are you waiting for?
So the White House has actually been pushing hard against putting any kind of sanctions issue out, saying if we put out any kind of sanctions word now, then that will encourage Russia to actually attack. I think that's absurd to think that Russia would attack because the House and the Senate actually applied sanctions to Russia if they attack. That's not provocative. That's a clear message back to them. But the White House has been actively working behind the scenes saying they don't want to pass anything that's a strong sanction until we actually get into an attack that's actually occurred. I go back to my previous statement. It's much easier to be able to prevent a war from starting than it is to try to stop it once it's actually begun.
But if you believe Putin has made up his mind, what leverage do you really have? Why not put those sanctions in place now?
The purpose of the sanctions has always been and continues to be deterrence. But let's also recognize the unique nature of the sanctions that we have outlined. These are some of the greatest sanctions, if not the strongest, that we've ever issued. As I articulated yesterday, it is directed at institutions, in particular financial institutions, and individuals, and it will exact absolute harm for the Russian economy and their government.
But if Putin has made up his mind, do you feel that this threat that has been looming is really going to deter him?
Absolutely. We strongly believe. Remember also, we still sincerely hope that there is a diplomatic path out of this moment. And within the context then of the fact that that window is still open, although it is absolutely narrowing, but within the context of a diplomatic path still being open, the deterrence effect, we believe, has merit.
Everyone forgets. Russia's economy is smaller than the size of Texas's economy. I'm grateful that they've already stepped up over the several years of the Trump administration, invest more in their defense. Quite frankly, probably those nations are also grateful as well now that they were actually preparing for their defense, because it takes multiple years to be able to be ready. But now it's time for them to be able to actually be ready and to be able to stand strong. You can't have a moment where people are weak in dealing with Putin. Putin's going to deal with strength, and if you don't meet strength with strength, then he will just roll over you, and we've seen that in multiple places.
I heard a minute ago Admiral Kirby make reference to that the Biden administration, I think he said, quote, "We're still digesting what happened back in August."
What has the administration learned from the chaos out of Kabul last August?
Well, we're still digesting what happened in August, Bill.
We brought up multiple times this piece of legislation to say, let's do it now. We actually brought up about 5 weeks ago the issue with Nord Stream 2 pipelines to be able to imply sanctions on that. Be able to make a very clear signal on their natural gas sales into Germany and into Western Europe. All these things should have already been done in place. It is so much easier to prevent a war from starting than it is to stop a war once it's already started. This is not about inserting ourselves into the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. This is about trying to prevent a war in Europe. We've all seen that movie before. It is dramatic in the effects. So we should be, as the United States, leaning forward to be able to say, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it. Let's apply it now and understand if you cross 1 inch into Ukraine, here's all the consequences that are coming. But now it's vague to Putin, and we shouldn't ever be vague. We should be clear with him what's actually coming.
I introduced legislation, targeted sanctions directed at the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Nord Stream 2 is the pipeline that Putin is building from Russia to Germany. The reason he's building the pipeline is that it skips Ukraine. It goes right around Ukraine. Why? Because the real insurance that Ukraine had against invasion is that Putin has to take his energy, his natural gas, in pipelines that go through Ukraine. Once he builds Nord Stream 2, he no longer has to worry about those pipelines. In 2019, I authored sanctions, bipartisan sanctions in Congress. They passed with overwhelming bipartisan majorities. President Trump signed my sanctions legislation into law, and Putin stopped building the pipeline the day President Trump signed those sanctions. That pipeline was dead for over a year until Joe Biden became president, and Putin began building that pipeline again on January 24th, 2021, 4 days after Biden was sworn into office. Why? Because he knew what was going to happen, which was that Joe Biden formally waived sanctions on Russia, on Putin, and gave the green light to build Nord Stream 2. That is why we have over 100,000 troops and Russian tanks on the border of Ukraine preparing to invade. That's why we're on the brink of war in Europe.